A brief video to talk about who does what on a short animated film, and specifically we're talking about animated shorts here. Although this photo I've got here is actually, this is the crew jumping for joy on Who Framed Roger Rabbit. You've got Bob Zemeckis there, and Don Hahn, and Peter Schneider from Disney, and that's Robert Watts, and a bunch of other folks. So who does what on a short? And this is really aimed at student filmmakers who are making a 3D short, and in particular ones who are using pre-made assets. I'm not going to get into the whole modeling, rigging, texturing thing here, because that is a whole extra level of complexity. So let's assume that you're using assets that you've downloaded from the web, free stuff, free sets, free rigs, free models, all that good stuff. So this is really aimed at short animated films that can be made in a short amount of time, like about 6 weeks, with a team of people working together. So what are the key roles? Who do you have to have on an animated film? So this, I think, is the list of people you've got to have. You've got to have a writer. That is to say, somebody's actually got to come up with an idea and write it down. And by the way, one person can do all of these things. Sometimes you have super talented people who can do all of this stuff, which is pretty rare. Mostly these roles get divided up among the crew. Let's say you've got let's say if you've got a film that's going to take you 6 weeks, you might have 6 or 7 people working on it. But all of these roles have to be assigned, and someone's got to do all of them. So you've got to have a writer. Somebody's actually got to write down the idea and tell it as a story in a few lines on a single sheet of paper, and that story needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Then you need a director. That's often the same person as the writer, someone who's going to make the key creative decisions on the film. And the director is a commonly misunderstood role. You're not necessarily going to boss everyone around, but you are going to have the final creative decision. Then you've got a producer, then you've got an editor who cuts the reel, a production designer or art director, someone who's going to design the look and feel of the thing. You're going to need storyboard artists, someone's got to do the storyboard. You're going to need someone to do the 3D layout, the cinematography role, and then you're going to need a pipeline person who's going to figure out how to light it, how to render it, and all that good stuff. These are the roles you cannot do without. Someone has got to tackle all of these. So let's start with the writer. So writers, you're going to write the story, and ideally this is nice and short, because student films or short films generally tend to be too long, and the shorter you can make this, the better your chances of actually getting it done. So keep it nice and short, just a few lines on a piece of paper, and it needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. The director, often, as I said, the same as the writer, and it's not about bossing people around, telling them all what to do. It's very much about trying to get the best work out of everyone, trying to tease out the best ideas from everyone, but in the end making decisions and having the final say. So directors basically make a lot of choices. So every day you might be presented with a series of choices on something. You might get 2 or 3 ideas about how to move something forward, and you have to make the final decision. Director has to work very well with the producer. This is Jeffrey Katzenberg, who I worked with at DreamWorks for many years, worked for, I should say, and he's the project manager. He or she is the project manager, keeps everything on track. Project managers, producers tend to be good people persons. They tend to be good at spreadsheets. And you've got to keep the train moving. You're kind of cheerleader in chief. You can do it. We can do it. We can get this done by Friday. And also figuring out how, if someone doesn't get it done by Friday, how you might quietly reassign that role to someone else, because ultimately you're going to have to tread on a few toes as producer. You've got to keep the train moving. Sometimes you need to reassign work if it's not getting done. Editor. Now this is a commonly neglected role. Someone's got to assemble the storyboards into the animatic, and that means you've got to cut it all together, typically in Premiere, time it out with sound and music, narration if you've got any. You've got to do a rough animatic. This is really important. Animators always want to skip this stage because it involves things we're not familiar with, but you've got to do it. It's going to have sound design, and then what happens is once you start animating, you drop the completed animation into the animatic. So you have one master edit, and all the shots get dropped into the master edit. So so on production, that means the editor is very busy, often updating the reel every day, or at the very least every other day, so that you can see how the new animation is playing in the animation reel. So very important job, the editor. Editor is the hub of the production, putting the animatic together. Production designer. So you've got to decide the look and feel of a production. This is a painting by Grant Wood. You know, you could be going for kind of Pixar, kind of candy colors, upbeat, positive, fun. You could be looking for a kind of illumination, McGuff look, kind of saturated colors like Sing. You could be looking for a sort of film noir thing where it's very, you know, heavy shadows, almost black and white. You could be looking for pretty much anything, you know, but you've got to make choices, because if you don't make decisions, in particular about stuff like time of day, you can see Grant Wood here, he's going for a kind of golden hour thing with long shadows being cast. It's probably about, you know, 6 o'clock in the afternoon in California. You got to be making choices about time of year. You know, is it January? Is it August? You know, you got to make all these choices, and if you don't make these choices, then the film will feel confusing. Production design is going to start off with mood boards, pulling together inspiration from the web, and then at some point they're going to need to do color keys or color scripts. Now this is something again that often gets skipped, but it's got to be done. And these can be really rough. They can be super rough, but you've got to do them because you've got to decide. Someone's got to tell lighting how to light the shot. And lighting is not just about making stuff bright or not bright. It's also about color. You know, what is it? What kind of color palette are you using? Is it predominantly blues and grays, like it might be in a spooky horror film, or is it kind of perky reds, yellows, and oranges in a sort of upbeat Pixar movie? So you got to make those choices. So that someone's got to do the color scripts so that you know how to light the film. You know what it's going to look like. Someone's got to do the storyboard, and this typically, obviously, is someone who likes drawing, and it can be a very rough storyboard. But someone's got to board out the script, because you start with the story. Often, the writer and the board artist are the same person. That doesn't have to be, and the storyboard artist will take the story, which hopefully you've written down because you've followed the steps properly. And then you do all the storyboards, typically working from a template. It's easier if you download a template from the web, typically 16 by 9, and which is to say HD, standard HD. And then you board the film, and then you cut that into an animatic, add sound effects, music, blah, 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 and you've got your story reels. And then once that's done, you need a head of layout. This should be someone who's got a bit of a feel for cinematography, who can take the assets, because you're going to have to assemble all of your assets, like your set. Now, if this is a simple film, you're not going to build all this stuff yourself, or not too much of it. You might just download a bunch of free assets from TurboSquid or the 3freeDmodels.com, or one of those places where you can assemble all the bits and pieces if this is a 3D film. But someone's got to do a 3D layout. And that means taking the boards and, you know, taking proxy versions of your characters, or even the final versions of your characters, sticking them in the shot. And then really it's about camera. Is it a wide shot? Are you going to start on an establishing shot? Are you then going to cut to a close-up? Is it a 2-shot? Is it a 3-shot? You know, how are you telling the story? So follow the boards, but you need someone here who's got a bit of a feel for camera and cinematography before you can start to animate. Finally, you need someone who's going to do the pipeline. And this isn't necessarily a kind of Shell Oil type pipeline like you're seeing here, but it comes from the same idea, which is someone's got to figure out, you know, all the 3D models, the lights, the textures, what you're going to render in. Are you rendering an Unreal Engine? Are you rendering an Arnold? You know, how are you going to do it? So this typically is the most techie person in the group, and you need at least one tech head in the group, otherwise it ain't going to get done. And then you've got to optimize all of your assets so that you know it will all work. And the pipeline supervisor is going to do a lot of this stuff early on, because you want to be doing tests as early as possible. Initially render tests, so you render out still images, and then later on rendering out shots so that you've got a sense of what each shot is going to look like, so you don't have any nasty surprises at the end of the film. Right, anyone else? Those are the key roles. There are other roles you could bring in. You could have a character designer if you were making original assets from scratch. But you know, this involves a whole extra layer of complexity that you may not want to deal with. Again, 3D modeling, I don't recommend getting lost in this stuff. I recommend downloading as much free stuff as you can from the web, because you can spend a lot of time making original assets. Rigging, again, making your own characters, very, very time consuming and complex. I wouldn't do it unless you're very experienced with this stuff. And so it goes with texturing as well. Composer, do you need a composer? Well, you might do, and this can help a lot. You can probably get a lot of royalty-free music from the web, and you certainly are going to want to download royalty-free music, or even any old film music for your animatic. But you know, finally, when you've done that, when you've got all the music, when you've got the music rough cut into your animatic, then you can send it out to a composer if you feel that you need one. And same goes for sound design, although here on your short film, the editor is probably going to do the basic sound design stuff, because that's usually what happens on a short film. So finally, those are your creative team. That's your creative team. These are the crucial roles. You've got to have these roles. Someone's got to write it. Someone must direct it, take the key creative decisions. Someone's got to produce it, keep the train on the track. Someone's got to edit it, update the reel every night. Someone's got to decide on the look and feel of the film, whether that's the production designer or art director, or whatever you want to call it. Someone's got to do the storyboards. Someone must do the 3D layout and cinematography. And someone's got to be the tech head, pipeline supervisor. If you don't have one of these roles on your film, you're doing it wrong. If you don't have one of these roles, create that role, because that job has to be done by somebody. And that's it. That's the creative team on a short animated film.